Larry Clark, and we're here with another Meet the Composer video. And today we have composer Pete Sciaino, and we have music educator Jennifer Wise. And Jennifer's going to ask a bunch of questions from Peter about what she wants to know about what Peter does with his life as a composer. So Jen, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. I'm really excited to meet both of you today, and I know my students are going to be so excited to hear about your experiences. Our band and orchestra members from Riker Hill Elementary School, we compiled questions this week, burning questions that we want to ask you about being a composer, your musical experience, how you got to where you are, which is publishing music, and anybody at home is really excited to hear about that. So if you don't mind, Mr. Sciaino, can we start at the beginning? So what were some of your early musical experiences? Andrew Z from our orchestra wants to know, how did you interact with music when you were a child?
Well, that's a good starting question. I would imagine it's different for everybody, you know, in terms of how you got into music. But I guess early on, I think I was attracted to the piano that was sitting in my parents' living room, you know, as we were growing up. It was just, you know, not anything I took lessons on at first, but I went over to it and was drawn to it and started playing around on it. And I think like any parent, you know, when you see that starting to happen, you know, your child takes interest in something, you encourage it. So, you know, eventually I was taking some piano lessons and things like that, and ultimately found myself listening to a lot of music, you know, turning on the radio. I remember sitting at the radio and pressing record on the tape deck, you know, to record the songs off the radio so that I could maybe try to figure them out on the piano later, you know, which...
Oh yeah, same.
yeah. I mean, I think that's how it started. I wanted to be able to, it was never enough to just be listening to it. I really wanted to engage with it in a different way. And I guess in retrospect, that makes a lot of sense. At the time, I just, you know, you're just doing what you do. But then I also was really lucky. Like I came through a school system that had a great music education, you know, system and a lot of culturally interesting, you know, music was played from a young age for us in our music general ed classes and so on and so forth. And by the time I got to where your students are in fourth, fifth, you know, that age group, grades, fourth and fifth grades, it was time to pick an instrument, right? And then you're really engaging with everything. And I think that was probably the real launching, you know, point for everything, because band for me, though I did play in the orchestra briefly, I tried the cello, but in the end I actually stopped playing the cello because I was too nervous to be in the concert. I remember that very clearly. Yeah, as a third, I didn't feel confident enough to continue with the concert. So I actually picked up the trumpet, and that I had so much early success on, I guess, and felt so good about that. I certainly was, you know, got over that fear at that point. And that's when I really started to engage with music, you know, in a different way, and playing with a group of people that was, you know, my friends and new friends, and meeting people that way. It became a social outlet and this positive environment for me, you know, early on. I probably didn't realize that at the time. I probably just thought like, oh, band is fun, but there was a greater purpose to it all. I think, you know, that came to light as we move forward. And then obviously, you know, the quicker version of the story after that is that, you know, continued playing the trumpet in the band and also pursuing my own musical things, whether it be, you know, getting together with friends and playing music and starting rock bands or whatever, you know, whatever different activities, jazz groups and so on and so forth, all the way through school. And then eventually going to college and majoring in music, though that took a while. Maybe we'll get to that later if it's of interest. But I didn't originally start as a music major. I transferred in and so on and so forth, actually. And then eventually started teaching and writing more music. I was always writing, but writing more specifically with the angle of using it with students. And eventually that turned into some pieces getting published and talking and meeting the right people. And that's been a new chapter, I guess, which has been a lot of fun. So that's the kind of the quickest version from day one to day now. But
now, right?
Yeah. I guess that's the shortest.
Did you have, you know, Josh and Andrew kind of want to know a little bit more about your family. Do you have any things like, are you just picking instruments and everybody at home was like, great, keep it up, we love it?
Right, right. So like a musical family in terms of like my direct family, not really. Like
Mhm.
my parents, you know, supporters of music and definitely had people in their families maybe who were musical, but they were not. They were teachers. They until for forever. So they had resources, I guess you could say, if they had to ask people, right? They had a music teacher in their school or what have you, but they weren't musicians. So my grandfather on my father's side immigrated here from Sicily, and he was a musician, and he was a trumpet player, and that was part of my inspiration for picking up the trumpet. I always knew that my grandfather had played the trumpet, and he played in local, like the Patterson local and different community groups, when he was working 3 jobs, and found that that was part of his outlet. And my family's from Passaic, New Jersey area,
Okay.
and so he played in the Italian feast bands, and so my family would go and see the Italian feast, go to the
Yeah.
Italian feast.
Yeah.
That's it. And
Yeah.
eventually, that was something like that. I actually ended up playing in it, for in those groups when I was in college and in high school. And anyway, so I think there was people in my family who were musical, um, but it wasn't the kind of thing like where both my parents were playing music around the house all the time, and then I joined in.
Yeah.
I know that that's the case for a lot of families, which is fabulous, but
Mhm.
but mine was a little more the extended family, I guess you could say. And I have cousins and uncles who were very musical and did all those things too. So it wasn't just my grandfather; it was other people too.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. I had a similar experience. My dad wanted to be a rock star, but it wasn't like something that happened in the house all the time,
Yeah,
So yeah, same thing. My parents were really encouraging, and I had a lot of musical friends and I enjoyed it, but it was it wasn't really in the house all the time except when I was making music. So
yeah. Well, I mean, as you know, whether or not your parents or family members or your students, family members, there's a certain amount of encouragement that they're giving to their students, but just by having them play an instrument, right, and
yeah.
coming home and playing it. So some of the students who you have asking these questions, I'm they may not realize their parents are so supportive of their music career, but their parents are obviously really a vital part of them playing
Oh,
an instrument right now. Yeah.
mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. So, you said you played in your band throughout high school and middle school and at school and did that?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So I played in the band in high school, fourth grade, fifth grade on.
Mhm.
I had some great teachers who were very encouraging, and I grew up in South Orange, New Jersey, which is Essex County, not far from
Not far from
Livingston.
Livingston. Yep.
Yeah, which is a great part of the state and great part of the country because it's very culturally diverse and it's very socioeconomically diverse, and it also cultivates some really interesting experiences for musicians. There's all kinds of stuff going on, whether it be professional musicians from New York City who live in the area who commute, or just people in our area who are musicians. And I think that was a great place to grow up and be inspired. So not only was I playing in the bands there, I was finding outlets, playing with people outside of that, whether it be like taking a private lesson with somebody or having a friend who knew somebody and was doing a concert and they wanted some people to come and sit in and play. And, I would do all that kind of stuff because I just was so interested in it. And so I did that through high school. And then I went to college at Syracuse University. And I originally went as an English major. And in retrospect, I think and this might be interesting for some students, who maybe are not in fourth, fifth grade thinking that far ahead, but for somebody that I think I lacked a little confidence at that time. Like as a 17-year-old, I teach high school kids now, and I see some very confident 17-year-old kids who know what they want to do. And I know that I was not that person. And so at that age, I didn't think I could put it all together. Like, okay, it's complicated. You got to schedule auditions. You got to practice the music. You got to go. Back then, you couldn't record or Zoom an
You
audition. You
can
had to
go to
go
the
there.
university and play for them, and
I
yep.
guess I just didn't wrap my head around all that stuff and wasn't mature enough to figure it out. And maybe I didn't want it enough. And so I said, well, I'll keep playing my instrument, but I'm going to be an English major because I did and I still do, like, that those kinds of things. But I went to college, and I started in the marching band, where I had this band director, Larry Clark. Maybe you've heard of him, but he was the band director there for a couple of years, and that was a cool experience. But I was in the marching band, and I auditioned for the wind ensemble, and got into that. So that was kind of a cool thing as a first year person. And then I started gaining some confidence. I auditioned for the jazz band. I started taking private lessons, and I had a great teacher, trumpet teacher named Dan Sapichetti, who was the trumpet teacher at Syracuse at the time, who was very, no holds barred. He would tell you what he felt, and I appreciated that. But he asked me one day in the middle of my freshman first semester, like, what are you doing? Basically, like, you're doing all these musical things and you're not a music major. So that's when I kind of said, yeah, I think I see what's happening here. So I auditioned while I was a student already at the school, for the School of Music, and got in, and the rest was, kind of history, I guess, in terms of playing in the bands, and then became a music education major, which was a choice mostly because I knew I wanted to do music. But then when they asked me, like, what do you want to do? Music composition, music? I chose education because my parents were teachers, and I knew that was a pretty good route.
That's really interesting. I had a similar experience, that I wanted to be a teacher, and then I said, well, yeah, maybe I'll teach music. I love music.
Yeah.
I make music, and so I'll try out. I'll go audition. And I ended up. Actually, I don't know if this is going to cause problems. We do have some really serious basketball fans in our fifth grade band in our section. I am a University of Connecticut graduate.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
That's okay. We'll let it go. I mean, I think if we were both still in the Big East, that would be a different conversation.
It'd be a little different. But it's great to hear that you were in the marching band, because I know we have some of our band members that are really interested in that too. So.
Oh yeah. I mean, if you have students who are sports fans and interested in that whole aspect of the college experience, I can tell you that that's some of the greatest inspiration I can give them to keep playing their instrument and practice and get good at it. Because the experiences I had at Syracuse playing in the band, not only did we go to football bowl games, but I was in the pep band for the basketball games, and I was actually the director of it for 3 years, where we had student directors, which was a cool experience. And I got to go in one of the years that we were there, we happened to go all the way to the championship game. 1996, Syracuse played Kentucky in the final game, and we traveled the country. We went to New Mexico and Denver and all these different places, and went to the games, and talk about a great experience. So if you're a sports fan and a band person, that's a pretty good mix sometimes. It works out.
Definitely, yeah. Oh, that's really exciting.
Yeah.
Did you do composition at all in your undergrad experience, or you said you were geared towards education?
Yeah, so I was a music education major as an undergrad, but I was always interested in composing music, and actually started really with arranging music. I think that's pretty typical, that you like even as early as a little kid, banging out the music on the piano and trying to figure out the tunes. So when I was in high school, I kind of got a little bit of a bug to arrange some music. I took the music.
What the difference is between composing and arranging?
Oh yes, great. That's a great one. Yeah, because that is a question for a lot of students, right? So basically, arranging is when you take somebody else's original material and set it for a certain group, right? So for example, if you heard a pop tune on the radio and you wanted to write it for your school band, you would go ahead and sit down and take the, Justin Timberlake tune or whatever it is, and you'd score it out and say, well, the flutes have the melody and the trumpets are going to play the background and percussion is going to go like this. So that's arranging, as opposed to composing, where all of the musical material from melody to harmony and all is all original. And right. So, and it doesn't necessarily have to be pop music. I could write an arrangement of the Star Spangled Banner or anything else, and it would still not be my own personal composition. Right. Though you're using a lot of the same practices, right? I mean, basically composition is finding the melody, and then you start arranging those melodies that you've composed. So it's just kind of one step further, I guess you could say. So,
yeah. So Kylan from our orchestra, she wanted to know, like, how long have you been a composer, but really you've been arranging since, you're very putting things out on the piano. And I think
right. And I guess that's a good question from her. Like, what makes a composer? Also, I mean, really, I mean, a composer, anybody can be a composer if you want to sit down and write something, you know, and you can write it. That the trick is getting to a point in composing where you feel like you're actually communicating something to somebody else and making it something that resonates with them, right? So I think that I was probably always like, even in high school when I was, you know, playing in rock bands or whatever it is, you're composing, right? You're figuring stuff out and you're kind of making it your own and trying to, you know, take music and have it speak to people. So I think that I've been composing for a long time. Composing for band and orchestra and school groups, that's something that came later on, because I started, you know, I graduated and I became a teacher. And then I, you know, again, I was always interested, and I had taken some composition lessons, though I didn't major in it in my undergrad. I was always interested in the jazz side of things. And I had a great jazz teacher, Joe Raposo at Syracuse University, who was a great composer. And I took private lessons with him while I was there. And so that kind of started the whole journey. And then I would write some things, though not a lot of stuff, for the school bands when I started teaching. Mostly it was arranging, though. Mostly it was writing a tune, like a fun tune to play in the stands at the marching band or at the games or whatever it is. But then ultimately found a lot of enjoyment out of it. And I felt like the kids really responded to something that I wrote and handed to them. So that was inspiring. So the students are always the inspiration for all of it. You know, if I wrote something that they liked, that got me excited about what I was going to write next to bring to them and show. And obviously we're still playing all music of all these other great composers, but it was, you know, a little exercise to do every so often. And then I started getting a little bit more serious about it and writing some good stuff. And then, of course, then you're composing, but are you a published composer at that point? No, you're not, right? That's another thing. You're not going to nobody's going to walk up to you and say, hey, can we publish your music? That's kind of like, you got to make those connections, and you got to, you know, send. And luckily I knew Larry, who was a person who was in my life earlier on, who I use as a resource, and some other people, and I sent my music around, and that's a whole learning process too, because that doesn't happen right away. You know, you kind of, that eventually happens. So from the student perspective there, in terms of the question, there's a lot of stages to it, but I think that I've been composing probably for much longer than I maybe, you know, would even think.
And publishing, right?
Yeah, right. And so a lot of your students, I hope, are composing, and maybe they didn't really consider themselves a composer, but they are, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I know we had a few questions kind of about your process as you're writing music. Like, if you're sitting down to write, say, a piece for a group like ours, like a band or an orchestra, about how long from like when you come up with the idea to when it gets put on the page from the publisher, about how long does that take?
That's a great question. I know that's a common question kids have, because it's, you know, seems pretty daunting to imagine maybe writing some of these pieces of music and must take forever and ever. But I guess it's a combination platter. I mean, there's no easy answer. I'd love to just say 2 days, you know, or something like that. But it depends on a few things. For example, how difficult the piece is part of it, and not so much because it takes longer to write more difficult music. Sometimes it takes a long time to write music that's a little easier to play, but you're just, in terms of like how many instruments you're writing for, usually the more difficult the music is, the higher grade level, which is, for students, if they don't know what grade level means, that, you know, if you as the band director or orchestra director go to buy some music, it may be at a grade 1 level or a grade 2, and that doesn't, people think like this is a first grade piece of music. That's not how the system works. But the higher the grade level, the harder the music. So the grade 4 and 5 music that you might write, which is very advanced, especially for young students, that stuff takes longer because there's more instruments that you're writing for and more parts. There's not just one trumpet part, there's 3 trumpet parts, and so on and so forth, right? So I think that's part of it. So that it's a little harder, it takes a little longer usually to write those pieces. But I would say, like, if I have a great idea and I'm excited about it, you can write a piece in a very quick amount of time. I just actually, you know, we've been home, right? Everybody's home doing these Zoom meetings and working remotely, and you've had a little bit more time. Oh, the commute's been taken out of our daily life, so you find yourself with a little bit extra time. I guess that's a perk.
Yeah.
And I was excited about writing something recently, and it was for a young group, probably similar grade level to your students in 4th and 5th grade. And I was able to, again, because I was excited about it and I had a cool idea and I wanted to see it through, I finished in a couple of days. So, it can be that quick. But I did a piece, this fall for a group that took me many months. So, that's the other side of it. And you're also working on all these things kind of at the same time. So it's you might go to one for a while and then you need a break from it and you go to another one, and that's gain some fresh perspective. So it's hard to put exact time on it, but hopefully I summed it up a little, because I know that's a good question from the students.
It is. There's a lot to it. So when you do get one of those creations to write music, me from our orchestra kind of want to know, like, where have they come from? Where have those ideas come from? And do you have like specific pieces you want to tell us about? Like,
Sure.
The idea for this one.
Yeah. So I think that you get inspiration in all different ways. Sometimes it's something as simple as like a title. I've come up with, and I know I'm not alone in this, but I've come up with the title first and say, like, well, that's a cool idea for a tune. What would this kind of tune sound like, and how would I make that work? So sometimes it's something like that, and sometimes you get that title idea from a phrase that somebody said, or a poem, and a phrase in a poem or something like that, and that's happened to me. Another time, a lot of time, the inspiration will come from the group that you're writing for. Sometimes you're asked to write a piece for a 6th grade band, and you say, okay, well, sometimes some of those kids, or sometimes that part of the country or something like that. And so as you're writing, you're thinking about those people and trying to think, what would you want to make a connection with them. You don't want to just write a piece of music that they can play. You want to write a piece of music that's going to be of value to those people. So most of the times, that's where I find that the greatest inspiration is that, like, I went and did a clinic recently with a honors 5th and 6th grade group here in Morris County. And I came out of that so excited about that age level kid, because I don't get to work with them on a daily basis, that I found myself coming right home and wanting to write something for that energy, that I got being in that group, the smiles that were looking back at me, and just, so most of the times it's people like that for sure. But then of course there's a third way, you talk about, sometimes it's a phrase and sometimes it's the people. The third way, I would say, is often listening to music. Like, I'll hear music and something about it will really kind of trigger something. And it's not always like, oh, I heard a piece that sounds like this and I try to write that same piece or something like it. Though sometimes you do try to write something in a similar style. It's oftentimes like a rhythm or something, or the way they change a time signature, right? Or something like that you want to play with yourself and come up with some ideas. So I think inspiration comes from all kinds of things for sure, and it can come from, and it's different for everybody. I've heard some people say that they go to an art museum and they're inspired to write music for a painting that they saw. I mean, it can come anywhere, but that's another great question because obviously it's different for everybody, but.
Do you have a favorite composition that you've done? Do you have like a favorite for our level for
Sure.
young band and orchestra?
Yeah, I've had, that's a good question. I have a lot of favorites. I think I hope they're almost like it's a piece of you, right? Once you're done with it, regardless of how easy or hard it is, like, you've put time into it and it comes from here, if you do it right. And so they're all meaningful in some way. I wrote one of the really deep, meaningful ones for me. I wrote is, and Larry knows this one too, was put out by Excelsior Music Publishing last year, and it's a piece called "Enduring Strength." And that one was a real emotional one for me to write because it was dedicated to a former student of mine who had passed away, and so there was obviously some very strong connections there in terms of the inspiration for it. That one is a favorite just because it's so, it just hits me the right way, and I very proud of being able to communicate something through music for that student. So that's a favorite. But then I've also gotten a lot of, so at an earlier grade level piece, I've gotten a lot of strong feedback. A piece that I wrote that's called Start Your Engines, and because it's a really fun up-tempo one, and it's for like, young band, grade one piece. And I love that one because I love the reaction I get from the students who have played it, so I mean, I like it myself, but when somebody else, when it's written for somebody, right? We're always writing music. We write for ourselves, but we definitely write to communicate with other people. So when it communicates and resonates with a young student, that makes it a favorite for sure.
That's great.
Yeah.
Now we have like a couple spitfire questions that I just want to fire at you, like short answers.
Short answer. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm Italian, so it's hard to have short answers. I'll do my best.
I know. I hear you. I see the hands going. I do the same thing. So,
yeah.
You were about to stand on stage right now to play a song on any instrument. What song would it be? That question's from Ria.
Oh, that's a hard one. Only one song.
Okay, just one song.
And I'm going to play it. Okay.
Yeah, and you're going to play it for us.
Off the top of my head, it's got to have a good melody. So, and also a melody that I would be able to bring something to myself. Instead of just playing it, I want to play it in my own style, right? I always like simple folk tunes like Shenandoah or something like that. That might be one to play. I actually really love, it's kind of a seasonal tune now, though I don't think it originally was, but Auld Lang Syne.
Oh, yeah.
Let all the acquaintance be. I love that. For some reason about that song, it really just hits me. So maybe I would want to play that one. Although it might be weird to play in the middle of, April or whatever month it is. Right
we all need a little uplifting.
Yeah. I guess, I don't know. Those are two options off the top of my head. I'm sure I'll think of something way better in like an hour, but
Oh, I know. That's the fun of these questions.
Okay. All right, good. Keep them coming. I'll try to I'll be short.
Okay. Terry wants to know, what are the perks of being a composer? Are there any perks?
Yeah. I mean, sincerely, it's hearing your music played back to you. I think that's a perk. I mean, it's a very, we talk about this all the time, talking about with other composers. It's like, so, you're by yourself. You're kind of isolated, right? Yeah. And when you get to bring it to people and share it with people, I think that's where, I keep thinking about this whole experience where we're all locked in. And when I'm writing something, part of the thing I'm looking most forward to is getting together with people to play it, so I think hearing it back is a real perk. And I think also just the being a composer, a perk is just that you're able to be creative. I think that most people, whether they realize it or not, really feed off being creative. And it may not be artistically creative. It might be creative in your line of work or coming up with ideas that help a project or something like that. That's all being creative. But composing, I think, for me is a great creative outlet. And I'm never done. Like I never feel like, I always want to get better at it. And here I am feeling pretty good about some of the compositions I have, but I know that I have better ones out there to go chase down. And I think we all need that. So that's a perk too, something to always be working on.
Mm-hmm. That's great. What kind of music do you like to listen to the most?
I think,
like if we were to get in your car, pile in a whole bit of turn on the radio, what's it set to?
It's probably jazz. That was always my first real thing I connected with. Once I declared myself a musician, or once I really got into music, I connected to jazz music for sure, and went to all my lessons and my camps that I went to early on were in jazz. And it was, like anything you get, I don't know that I write or play better jazz than I do classical or anything else. I don't think I necessarily do. I'd like to think I'm pretty balanced at this point, but that was what got me there. Like the passion I had for listening to jazz, it really spoke to me, and it still does. And I think that there's, as a composer of jazz music, but also other music, I think that the whole vibe of jazz, always pushing the boundaries and the improvisation and things like that have really helped fuel some more interesting compositions ultimately. So I would say jazz is the thing I would listen to probably first.
Okay. And we have, one more question for you, and you can share, anything after this, but
Sure.
I think it's kind of a two-part, and I think these things go hand in hand. Christine wants to know if you have any composer friends,
Okay.
and Andrew wants to know, like, do you work with a team or mostly, create music on your own? I know you were talking about a lot of the connections you had, but I think they want to know, what your network is like right now as
Sure,
you're.
sure. That's a really advanced question. I'm impressed. I would say, first of all, to answer the second question first, that I most composition stuff, is by your, at least starts that way. I mean, you go through a whole process after you compose a piece of music. At least I do, where I do like to share it with people, and sometimes it's a coworker, and sometimes it's an editor at a publishing company, or sometimes it's just some music education contacts and friends that I have. I'll email, hey, what do you think? You're a orchestra director, and you are at this grade level. Would this work for your kids? And if they're generous enough, and usually they are, if they're available, I guess you could say, or have the time to look over something for me, I always take their feedback. I think that's essential, because it may not change the exact note or melody that I've come up with, but it might change the key signature to fit the group better, or it might change the fingering, or so on. And so, it might change the key to help that kind of facilitation happen. So I think that in that sense, we're always working in teams. A composer is writing music for school groups. I think we're all on that team, right? The team is to make those students have a great experience, write something that connects to that with them, but they can also learn something from. So that's kind of the more up in the clouds answer to that I guess. But I have it's funny, again, this whole coronavirus situation has brought us to try some different things. So my brother is a musician. He's a different kind of musician, though. He's not a composer of band or orchestra music or anything like that. But he's a great musician, and actually he tours the world, playing in groups and more electronic dance music and a lot of very cool rock stuff. And so, but he's got a technical side down. He's a very visual and auditory person in terms of learning all the material. So we had the idea that, like, I could write a piece of music, and he could put some electronic effects to it, and so on and so forth. So we've been collaborating the last couple of weeks on a project that I hope to get published in the next few years. Or so I guess in that sense I have worked in groups. In terms of composer friends, I think that composers and a lot of I think the students might be surprised by this, but if they opened up their band folder at home and looked through the 3 or 4 or 5 names that they might have in their folder right now, my guess is that those 3 or 4 or 5 people know each other. It's a community that I've only more recently kind of become a member of, compared to some people who have been in this business for a really long time. But everybody is really cool with each other. Like there's a lot of interaction there, and then I think you meet people, whether it be on Facebook or now these more modern ways, but really conventions or opportunities for conducting or being a clinician or something like that, judging assignments, things like that. And you get to know a lot of these people, and they become some of your closest friends and some people that you really, really value in your life. So I do have, I'm proud to say I do have some composer friends at this point, and that's also that's another perk of the composing, I guess you could say. Yeah. Back to the previous question.
Yeah, that's I like that question. So not sports cars, not
Yeah, that stuff. If that is a perk, maybe I haven't gotten there yet. No, that's not really what it's about. That's not what it's about. No perks like that. Though you do get to meet some great students. Sometimes you're invited to come and conduct a group or to work with a group as a clinician, and that's, to me, great, because you're meeting all kinds of different people and you're connecting with all kinds of different students. So you're kind of broad. We all want to be teaching music. We want to share this. You know, none of us own music. None of us are above it. You know, we're all just trying to organize. The composition is just an organization of musical ideas that you came up with, but they're all the same 12 notes that we keep using over and over again, right? So I think that, you know, we're all in this together. So when you start meeting all these different people and get to communicate this passion for what you have with different people, you know, even something like we're doing now and talking about it, that's the real perk, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I agree. And we're, you know, and in our first and second years of playing our instrument, we're discovering a lot of that right now. It's like, oh, wow, everybody's sitting next to me, all 50, 60 people in the room right now. We're all learning the same things. We're all working on the same things. We're all trying to get, you know, little by little to that musical goal. So.
Oh yeah. And I think I think that teachers like nowadays, like yourself, and even in saying that, you know, that's proof that we as teachers are definitely doing a better job of letting kids know that that's a big part of the band experience. You know, I was probably an oblivious 9 and 10-year-old, so I don't know if I would have caught it anyway, but I think I was drawn to music because of the music, but I stayed because of those relationships that I was having. And I, you know, because we all had a common interest, you know, that's a really important thing. If you have most of the friends that you probably have, you have some sort of common interests with, you know, that's what you talk about and that's what you get excited about. And you see yourself in those people, right? So I think that the bands nowadays, you know, from what I see and what amazing things that a lot of music educators are doing around the country is that we're fostering that whole thing, that we're all part of this thing that's greater than ourselves. And we all have to work hard at it so that we all achieve great things together. But when we do, we're going to do it not by ourselves. We're going to be able to share it with somebody. And that sense of community is way more important than, you know, you see that, like going back to the sports analogies, right? I'm sure any person who's won an MVP award or won the scoring title in their sport would much rather have a championship that they won with their team, right? That's right. Yeah. So it's because you're sharing it with somebody, and it's what's also making this whole you know, stay at home thing so hard, is that we're trying to do our best to share with each other, you know, but it's got a new set of challenges that comes with it. So band is a great place to do that. Orchestra and band, man, that's the perfect place to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I'm really glad you could sit down and, you know, talk with us about this today, because then, you know, it's been tough for the continue playing and keep sharing, and you know, it's good to hear you say the same things that we've been, you know, thinking about what we do, and you know, why it's so important to us. And so we know it's important to us, but we can't always say why. It doesn't always come out the right way, you know, but thank you for doing that for us today. Do you have any comments you want to leave us with before we wrap up? Or
I don't think so. Thanks to your students for investing their time and coming up with such great questions. I think that they really were thoughtful about this. Yeah, for sure. And thanks to Larry and for putting this together, and thank you, Jen, for taking the time, because I think that you know, it's a benefit for your students, maybe some other students and teachers who might watch this, but just overall for us to make these connections is it's great for me too. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Thank you for being with us today. We really like your time and your insight. So.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Excellent. Thank you so much to both of you. And like I said, like Peter said, hope a lot of students will get something out of this at your school and everywhere around the country. We appreciate it. Bye-bye.